Welcome to this video series on how learning works. In this and the following videos in this series, we will focus in on how the brain engages in learning and how that process can be enhanced or impeded for an individual engaged in a learning process. In this first video, our goal is simply to lay out what I'm calling the landscape of learning. By the end of this video, you should be able to explain the basic features associated with learning. In the following videos, we will focus in on each of these features in turn in order to better unpack this learning landscape. So let's begin. The landscape of learning starts quite simply with learning activities. For example, listening to a lecture is a learning activity, or watching this video, for instance, is a learning activity. Doing a homework assignment is typically a learning activity, as would be a discussion with peers, reading a text for class, or working through a process in a lab. These are all activities individuals participate in with a goal of learning. So we have these learning activities, and then the brain does some stuff. We'll get into more detail about what it is the brain does in our next video, but for the moment, it is enough to say that learning can only happen if the brain actually does some stuff in the context of engagement in some kind of learning activity. I mean, we might even go so far as to say that the brain doing stuff is the learning activity itself. Regardless, there are learning activities, the brain does some stuff, and then learning occurs. But of course, that is not the end of the story. There are a number of things that can support and enhance this learning process, and other things that can serve as barriers to learning. The mechanism for each of these things is through the impact they have on the brain. To start with, we have something called metacognitive awareness. Metacognitive awareness is basically a person's awareness of their learning and of the things that impact their learning. For example, if I realize I don't understand what metacognitive awareness is, that is itself a form of metacognitive awareness. Similarly, awareness that you need to take a break in order to be able to focus on your studying also counts as a form of metacognitive awareness. In video 3 of this series, we will discuss metacognition and metacognitive awareness in more detail. Another contributor to learning is simply the motivation to learn. When someone is motivated to learn, and often also while they become metacognitively aware, they tend to engage in what we call self-regulating behaviors. These behaviors are things like goal setting and decision making. When those goals and decisions are made well, they can have a tremendous positive impact on the degree to which learning actually occurs. On the flip side, there are a number of circumstances that create barriers to learning. For example, high levels of stress or sudden distraction can have significant negative impacts on the brain's ability to engage effectively in the learning process. The more stress in play or the harsher the cognitive disruption, the harder it will be for the learner to learn. Fortunately, there are a variety of things that instructors can do to help promote behaviors conducive to learning and both minimize and ameliorate the impact of cognitive disruptions. We will explore these in more detail in a future video. Finally, we would be remiss in our account of the landscape of learning if we were not explicit about the true context of learning, which is nearly exclusively a context of interaction between individuals. This can include student interactions with each other, student exchanges with the instructor, the learner and an author, and so on. What's important to grasp at this stage is that the sociocultural nature of learning has many implications, not the least of which is that the choices and behaviors of one individual in a learning environment can impact the learning of others in that same learning environment, both positively and negatively. In upcoming videos, we will hone in on this a little more as we explore each feature of the landscape of learning more carefully. By the end of this video series, you should be able to identify a wide variety of factors that impact learning, both positively and negatively, along with ways in which you can make a positive difference for your students' ability to learn. At this point, let's simply acknowledge that rather a lot of the learning process is not associated with base levels of what we might call intelligence, but is instead about factors sometimes mistakenly considered to be outside the purview of the instructor. As you continue watching this video series on how learning works, I encourage you to think about how you as an instructor might in fact be able to promote and prompt positive self-regulating behaviors and begin to mitigate some of the factors introduced by barriers related to cognitive disruption. Further, see if you can identify ways to positively leverage the diversity present in your class simply due to the fact that you have an array of individuals engaging with one another for the purpose of learning. Stay tuned and thanks for watching.